Good morning and happy Friday. You're watching Business World Live. I'm Danie, Laurel.
And I'm Jess Delos Santos. It's the start of the last trading day of the week, but first, let's go straight to our top story. NEDA Acting Chief Carl Kendrick Chua is warning that a delay in the passage of the 4.5 trillion peso national budget for next year will hurt economic recovery. Chua says a reenacted budget will force the government to spend less, will prevent the disbursement of funds for pandemic response and infrastructure projects. RCBC Chief Economist Mike Ricafort shares this view, saying a reenacted spending plan may definitely lead to slower economic growth and reducing spending. Management Association of the Philippines President Francis Lim says what happened in 2019 should not be repeated this year. He was referring to the delay of the passage of the budget for that year amid an impasse between the House of Representatives and the Senate. He notes that the economy grew only 5.6% in the first quarter of 2019, lower than the 6.5% during the same period in 2018. Ricafort also notes that GDP in 2019 would have settled at 7% if the budget was passed on time. Growth for full year 2019 stood at 5.9%, the slowest in 8 years. The House of Representatives has passed a 2021 budget on second reading earlier this week, but Speaker Alan Peter Cayetano has suspended the session until November 16 amid a row for speakership with Marinduque Representative Lord Alan Velasco. President Duterte has urged lawmakers to end the House crisis and work on ensuring the timely passage of the budget instead.
Either you resolve the issue sa impasse ninyo dyan and pass the budget legally and constitutionally. Pag hindi ninyo ginawa, ako ang gagawa para sa inyo. I am not going to give a timeline. Hindi mga diktador lang gumagawa ng ganon. Gusto ko na ayusin ninyo. If and when I see that there will be a delay and it will resolve in the...
And it seems as though we are on the cusp of another budget problem here, Dan, but we have other issues to be pondering over, one of which is widening deficit. Give us those fresh trade figures.
Okay, so on the one hand, as you mentioned, budget deficit, but there's also a widening external trade deficit. So let's kick off with exports. You can see on my terminal here, down by 18.6% for the month of August. I'm going to clarify that because actually there's conflicting reports here. It did also mention on Bloomberg that it was down by 21%. So perhaps they're still digesting those figures that just came out 20 minutes ago. Nevertheless, this is still both 18.6% and also 21%, still significantly a bigger drop than what analysts were just expecting, which was an 8.3% contraction in terms of exports. So again, falling much bigger than expected by double digits here. I'm just going to take a quick peek as well at the import side, and that also fell. That fell by 22.6%, and the estimate was again for it to fall, but at a lesser degree. So we were hoping to actually be importing more. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad to have higher imports because this also means that there might be capital spending, diba? So you could import things for construction, for example, or even more oil, which also spurs the economy. So it does seem that those imports were lower than expected, dropping by 17%. Now, this actually brings our budget deficit, rather trade deficit, to a level that is minus 2076, so a bit over $2 billion of a drop here, and that is slightly higher than what was estimated at negative 1.967 billion. And I just want to take a quick peek as well at the local currency. It has been trading rather flattish here. We are at 48.315 to the greenback, so still rather strong despite the fact that we did have a widening trade deficit, Jess. Now let's take a step back and take a quick peek at how equities had performed overnight over in Wall Street and the rest of the world. You can see on my terminal here the Dow Jones actually up by 0.4%, S&P 500 enjoying some gains, and the Nasdaq as well. So quite a good showing here. What happened na naman? This again, everything related to President Donald Trump and what's happening with the fiscal stimulus. Again, because the US Fed had signaled that they need this fiscal stimulus. And the future seemed to be opening higher here after the White House appeared to shift their language and signal that the Trump administration is again leaning towards a large-scale stimulus bill. So there were news that Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin told Nancy Pelosi, she's of course a speaker, that President Donald Trump wants an agreement on a comprehensive aid package. Now, over in Asia, a lot of eyes on China because they've been sleeping for basically 1 week now. So it's still actually closed right now, but they are slated for an opening today. That's after a week-long holiday over in China. Meanwhile, global equities seem to be edging back towards last month's all-time high. What are investors betting on? A Joe Biden victory in November in the US presidential elections. That is because if the Democrats do win, they seem to be having a bigger fiscal stimulus, which might drive the US economy. So that's what they call a blue wave and stronger fiscal policy. Meanwhile, President Trump's doctor says he expects him to safely return to public engagements already by tomorrow. Now let's move on to our local bourse. After we already had a big gain yesterday that snapped 3 straight days of losses, we seem to be pulling back a touch at the open. We're down by 0.3%. After what you can see here, I'm just going to widen that because look at that. We were trading in the red for most of yesterday, right? And then suddenly towards the end, a huge spike up. And that ended up closing at 1.3% higher from Wednesday. So it was really last minute bargain hunting. This according to Timson Securities. 3 consecutive days in the red. Stocks seem to be cheaper now. And this is what Phil Stock's Financial calls a dead cat bounce or just a technical bounce. Whenever they see that the index has had a series of losses, some people start buying in. But he says that the underlying problem is that this sell-off is likely to continue. And we see that at the opening right now. Another thing that they're saying hounded the sentiment is, of course, like you said, deliberations on the 2021 budget might not be happening na naman. And they said, take a look at what happened in 2019. Because of that budget impasse, it sent shocks to our GDP. And plus the pandemic pass, so that might actually exacerbate the economic transaction. Meanwhile, the value turnovers were very, very strong yesterday. So around 19.6 billion pesos were switching hands. So quite a lot of trades yesterday. However, net foreign selling continuing to balloon. And I'm going to get back to that later in the markets, but we're at the 20th straight day of net foreign selling. I'll just take a quick peek at the sectors here, especially at the financial space and how that's holding up. It's actually down by 0.3%, but it's not down as much as properties, which are being sold off by 1.6%. Now, this from the central bank. They're eyeing a cap on digital banking licenses amid a policy review. Now, recall that they were, looking at encouraging more online banks to come along, but they also did say that they have a right to set a limit on the number of digital bank entrants. This is according to, of course, the Bangko Sentral Governor Ben Diokno. Another thing that they will be watching out for when it comes to financial, digital banks is digital tokens. That's because virtual currency transactions hit, get this, 59 billion pesos in just the first half of the year. That's 3 times as much as 2019's total value. So a lot of people seem to be banking on those digital currencies. They're going to be looking at that and regulating that quite well. So a lot of things going on here in terms of the banking space, and we'll see whether those digital banks will start entering that foray.
Well, Dan, I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier, that last minute shopping and really causing that spike yesterday. Which were the biggest bets from yesterday, and are they still being picked up in the open?
Okay, great question. I'm just going to take a quick peek here at which stocks did perform. And I just, as you mentioned yesterday, which were the ones being picked up? Well, one was actually Jollibee. That climbed 3.6%. That's after they said that they had just opened their first store in Rome, in Italy. So you can actually eat Jollibee in Italy. Recall that they already have one in Milan. Just the fact that they're resuming, expansion plans in Europe sent that soaring. And that's still going up this morning. It's still up by 0.3%. one of the best performers. Another one was Metro Pacific. That was up by 3.5%. It's been a record 7 days of gains. Of course, this comes after they started a 5 billion peso stock buyback, right? And a lot of investors started riding in that wave. But it does seem to be pulling back now. It's down by 1.5%. Another one that brought up the bourse yesterday was SMIC. That basically was, contributed more than half to the gain of the PSI. It's such a heavy company. And you can see there that that's still continuing to be in the green, SM Investments, but SM Prime is dragging down the bourse. It's the worst performer, down by 1.5%. Another one I want to watch out for, I'm checking if it's here, that is Globe Telecom. I just pulled that out for you guys because Globe Telecom rose by 2.6% yesterday. That was the first gain that this telco player had seen in the past 4 days. The company had said yesterday it will be installing 800 cell sites in the fourth quarter, and it rose. And they said they'll be also changing all the cell sites to 4G or LTE. So there's going to be 319 cell sites here in Metro Manila, but also in Mindanao. So a lot of expansion plans there. Globe, however, pulling back on that uptrend this morning. That's down by 1.4%, Jess. Now let's take a breather from the equity space. I'll go back to markets later on in the broadcast. Let's take a look at the broader business community. So it seems to be bothered by natural catastrophes, according to the World Economic Forum's latest report. So what else did the report say?
All right, that precisely, natural disaster, a top concern for businesses, at least in the Philippines, and a host of other issues here. We're talking failure of national government, as well as the spread of infectious diseases. And like what you mentioned, that of course is coming from the latest study of the World Economic Forum entitled Regional Risk for Doing Business in 2020. Just to contextualize things here, the survey was conducted from January to July this year. And business executives were given a list of 30 risk issues here in which they have to pick which, according to them, are the top 5 concerns that they see for affecting the business community within the next 10 years. So let's try to take a look at the results here for the Philippines. It would show, like what we mentioned, catastrophes being the top risk here for most of firms here in the country at 54.5%. And what's very interesting here as well is that we actually rank second to Japan when it comes to rating catastrophes or natural catastrophes as a top issue. That's way above, in fact, the global average of just 15.8%. Of course, we have to consider the fact that the Philippines is regularly hit by earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and of course, typhoons. We have an average of around 20 per year. Now, other concerns here include national government, a failure of national government to be exact at 51.1%. That ties the spread of infectious diseases at 51.1%. Also, other concerns here that includes a failure of infrastructure and, of course, the weather. Now, that's very telling as well, these results, because these pretty much differ from a global concerns here. Because if you try to take a look at the global list here, you would see that unemployment and underemployment would actually account for the top risks here among worldwide firms. That's 34.5%. Followed by the spread of diseases, and even fiscal crisis and cyber attacks. Unemployment concern in the Philippines, just to give you an idea, is only at 19.3%. We are the 100th overall across the world. Now, also looking at the regional level here, in East Asia and the Pacific, top concerns would be infectious diseases, as well as asset bubbles and national catastrophes. And I have some interesting thoughts here from Vicabola, an economist from the UANP. He's saying, that these concerns are valid and that the country needs to spend more to minimize negative effects of calamities. But what's interesting here for him is a failure of national governance. And according to him, that is clearly a strong message. But more than the national government, he says a problem is with LGUs, whose officials do not have national interest at heart.
That's so stressful, Jess. And dami nang ang issues sa health crisis. Meron pang natural catastrophes that we haven't really taken into account yet. And good point. All right, thank you for that update. And hopefully this don't exacerbate the economic crisis we're already experiencing. Checking in on the biggest headlines we're watching this Friday morning. NEDA believes the rice tariffication law will help reduce poverty and boost growth in the long term. Acting NEDA Secretary Carl Kendrick Chua said the rice tariffication law is critical to keeping the poverty rate within their target range. The law is also expected to reduce poverty incidence by 1.2 percentage points, since rice is still a staple food in most households here in the country. Chua noted that cheaper rice will have a positive effect to poor families because it accounts for 30% of their household spending. However, national scientist and former UP President Emil Javier also pointed out that the so-called losers of this program are majority of farmers who will not receive benefits from the Rice Competitiveness Enhancement Fund. Now, the Transportation Department is planning to start construction on the PNR Clark Phase 2 rail line that's within the fourth quarter of this week. All remaining contract packages for the project have been awarded for the train line that will connect Malolos to Clark. Transport officials are now eyeing the partial operability by 2023 and the full completion of the train line by 2025. The PNR Clark Phase 2 project is part of the planned 163-kilometer north-south commuter railway project.
The country's economy is seen to grow 7.2% next year. That's according to Japan-based Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group, which says the Philippines appears to be avoiding a resurgence of COVID-19 cases. MUFG notes that the Philippines is doing, quote, relatively okay in handling the COVID-19 crisis, unlike some economies in Europe that are struggling with a coronavirus resurgence. MUFG's 2021 outlook is within the government's projection of 6.5% to 7.5% next year. The group, however, sees the Philippine economy contracting by 7.2% this year, also within the official range of between negative 4.5 and negative 7.5%. MUFG adds that the central bank has limited scope for further easing, but any such moves may come in early next year. The pandemic has given rise to from-home setups, pushing companies to tap on cloud, software services, and data to help ease them into that transition. But what the crisis has also boosted is the use of data analytics as a form of pandemic response. Now, to tell us more about that, we have Ryan Guadalquiver, Philippine Country Manager for SAS. Good morning, sir.
Hi. Hi, good morning, Jester. Thank you for having me.
All right, sir. First things first, give us an idea of what SAS actually is doing here. I mean, you've been here for decades. You're known to be a software giant at the forefront when it comes really to data analytics. But how has the company progressed, and what are you doing at this stage?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, SAS Institute is the leader when it comes to advanced analytics. Here in the Philippines, we're working closely with the financial services industry, with the telcos, and also with the government and manufacturing companies. So we are probably the biggest provider here when it comes to fraud management solution, particularly in the banking industry. We're working with them on anti-money laundering systems. And of course, also with the regulatory side, we're working closely with them. On the other industries, we're working closely with them when it comes to providing more customer intelligence so they be able to come up with products and services that are suited for their customers.
That's something that we're going to dwell into more later in the interview, and how really data analytics is helping these industries to actually cope with the new way of doing things. But what I'm really interested in at this stage is how the COVID-19 pandemic really is becoming a big data analytics issue as well. I mean, how would data help in monitoring and reducing the impact of the virus?
Yeah, so starting March when we had that lockdown, right? From the time you wake up and the time you sleep, you always look at data, right? With this COVID monitoring system that our government has been putting on, and not just that, you've seen a lot of data flowing around during this pandemic. I call that more of a descriptive analytics, wherein they gather data and make reports out of it. And that's very useful for us to be able to see the progress of this pandemic. Now, as we progress, right, you've seen that there's a more, I would say, advanced way of they're using data analytics, using contact tracing. And I
Mhm.
think the government have also implemented on that kind of system through the local government units, wherein they'll be able to trace historical data where a COVID patient has been going around, right? They be able to trace their touch points so that they will be able to isolate more effectively potential COVID patients, right? So not only that, as we went through June, May, right, as we started opening, there were also a lot of cases in terms of really giving some, I would say, some challenges with our healthcare sector. So one solution that they've implemented is what we call medical resource optimization analytics, wherein they're able to plan well whatever their medical resources that they need in the future. So as when it comes to bed capacity, when it comes to PPEs, when it comes to ventilators, so they're able to maximize and plan out and predict whatever medical resource equipment they need in the future.
And I want to zero in on something that you said earlier. I mean, one of the major, at least, steps that the government has made when it comes to the use of data analytics would have to be contact tracing. But that,
Yeah.
though, is actually peppered with some concerns here, especially when you're talking about data security. I mean, that has been the holdup in some of the applications that were being pushed forward as a means of conducting contact tracing. So, how do you assure the security and privacy of data?
Yeah, so there's some standards when it comes to data security, and all of the solutions from a uh, back-end systems perspective, they try to secure whatever personal data you have. Now, you can always conduct contact tracing in a way that all those names do not need to be broadcast, right? That's one. So it will be managed basically from the agency side who's managing the contact tracing.
All right. And then moving forward, I mean, all eyes now really on the development of a possible cure and vaccine. In the Philippines, in fact, we already have 3 vaccines already being processed for clinical trials. How is developing healthcare solutions a data challenge as well?
So for the development of vaccine, a lot of pharmaceuticals are using data analytics when it comes to coming up with, of course, the research on how to come up with the right formulation when it comes to vaccine. That's always been, I would say, a tool that they've used doing medical research to ensure that you know. All these vaccines are really uh, coming from really getting all those information that they need to come up with good effective medicines.
Okay, from the use of data when it comes to COVID-19 as a health issue, let's move on to how it's helping businesses actually adapt to the new way of doing things. One interesting point that you raised earlier was actually you've been helping the financial sector. Let's focus in on that. I mean, how is data management, at least for the financial sector, holding up at this stage given the backdrop of a pandemic?
So there's a few areas in the financial sector. One, with the rise of digital, right? You've seen, the consumer have shifted the way they do things, right? So with that rise of digital, it's important now for financial or companies or banks to get into digital banking, right? And that's where analytics can play a key role because you collect, of course, whatever historical transactions that your clients are doing, whether it's through your digital asset or through the usual, banking branches. So with that, you'll be able to come up with more personalized approach when it comes to your
Mhm.
service to your clients. That's one. The other one, I talk about the area of fraud, right? Of course, going digital also. there's an important aspect that you'll be able to look at all these transactions that it will not, you prevent all these fraudulent transactions, and that's where data analytics also can help, right? In ensuring that. The third one, I would say, I call it more of business scenario analytics, wherein the world we live in now, it's quite unpredictable. So businesses such as financial sector need to plan out for the future. And that's where scenario planning is very important. And that's part of data analytics practice.
All right, and very quickly now, what can you say about the level of adoption to data analytics here in the Philippines, especially when it comes to government as well? How is the government making better sense of data?
Yeah. So right now, majority, I would say we're still at the data awareness stage here in the Philippines. But there are certain industries and companies that are quite advanced. And there are, of course, enterprises in telco, banking, which are more advanced in the way they adopt data analytics. With the government, they're starting now. A lot of organizations now are doing their digital transformation. And before, it used to be a journey that they're looking at 2 to 3 years. But now, because of this pandemic, it has pushed them to adopt digital as soon as possible, right? We've seen that adoption has also pushed data analytics adoption much faster because it's important, of course, in a digital world to get your
All right.
data right and be able to address customer services.
All right, the country's still at the awareness stage, but at least in a way, if there's any silver lining to the pandemic, it has helped at least push forward the use of data. Thank you very much, Ryan Guadalquiver, Country Manager for the Philippines of SAS. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good morning.
Okay, guys, a quick last check on the markets before we let you go for the weekend. Quick check on Converge ICT IPO that has now been priced. That's at 16 pesos and 80 centavos each. That's near the lower end of the range. The original plan was up to 24, so significantly cheaper than they had been hoping for. And you can actually see here how the telco stocks are performing. A bit of a mixed bag here. You've got PLDT, our largest player, up by 0.5%. Globe is down by 0.6%, but you've got Dito Telecom enjoying some gains here, more than 3% now as well. Now, moving on to just some plans of the local boards when it comes to 2021. They're continuing to try and court foreign investors, especially after we've seen all of that net foreign selling. I'm actually going to pull that out for you. This from PSE President Ramon Monzon. He says they are planning to introduce new sector classifications and indices as part of its recovery plan. And he said to attract the foreign investors, they need to come up with new sector classifications. They will be increasing the sectors from 6 over to 8, and that will be launched in the first half of 2021. Now, they're actually going to be adding things like technology, media, and telecom sector as well, which we haven't really seen here, energy and utilities and consumer sector. So very, very interesting. They're also going to be still pushing for new products like ETFs, so exchange-traded funds, and even an index that tracks the performance of mid-cap companies and high-dividend issuers. So not just those big blue chips, but also the middle-sized companies as well. They're also trying to increase market activity by, of course, changing the listing rules, making it easier. We've reported that earlier on. Now, just to show our chart here, the PSE has recorded net foreign selling of 109 billion pesos year to date, Jess. And that's the first look into the business day. Today is Friday, October 9, 2020. I'm Danie, Laurel.
Catch us again Monday next week at 9:30 a.m. I'm Jess Delos Santos. We are One News. Have a great weekend.